Oh my Krishna. Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Girivaradari Jaya Girivaradari Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Girivaradari Jaya Girivaradari Jaya Yashodanandana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Yashoda Nandana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Kunja Bihari Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jai Shri Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnu Pada Paramahamsa Brihvacharya Stottara Satya Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnu Pada Paramahamsa Brihvacharya Astottara Satya Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Krantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Nitai Gaura Premanandi Hari Hari Bo Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutare Srimate Divamrita Swaminita Namane Pacharapur Viraksham Cha Bhakta Char Pravinatam Parartha Tapikarunyam Yasya Sarvejti Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarine Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Today we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 7th canto, The Science of God. We're beginning chapter 6, having finished the introduction to Prahlad Maharaj, the saintly son of Hiranyakashipu. Now chapter 6, Prahlad instructs his demoniac schoolmates. I'll read the introduction to the chapter first. This chapter describes Prahlad Maharaj's instructions to his class friends. In speaking to his friends, who were all sons of demons, Prahlad stressed that every living entity, especially in human society, must be interested in spiritual realization from the very beginning of life. When human beings are children, they should be taught that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the worshipable deity for everyone. One should not be very much interested in material enjoyment. Instead, one should be satisfied with whatever material profits are easily obtainable. And because the duration of one's life is very short, one should utilize every moment for spiritual advancement. One may wrongly think, in the beginning of our lives, let us enjoy material facilities, and in old age we may become Krishna conscious. Such materialistic thoughts are always useless, because in old age one cannot be trained in the spiritual way of life. Therefore, from the very beginning of life, one should engage in devotional service. Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu. This is the duty of all living entities. Material education is infected by the three-mode of nature, but spiritual education, for which there is a great need in human society, is transcendental. Prahlad Maharaj disclosed the secret of how he had received instructions from Narada Muni. By accepting the lotus feet of Prahlad Maharaj, who is in the Parampara succession, one will be able to understand the mode of spiritual life. In accepting this mode of activity, there is no need for material qualifications. After Prahlad Maharaj's class friends had listened to Prahlad Maharaj, they inquired how he had become so learned and advanced. In this way, the chapter ends. Text number 1, famous verse, quoted by Srila Prabhupada in his introduction to Srimad Bhagavatam. Or was it quoted by the editors? Anyway, it's right there in the beginning, but Prabhupada quote this verse quite a lot. So, Canto 7, Chapter 6, text number 1 says, Shri Prarad Uvacha Kaumara Acharit Pragyo Dharman Bhagavatan Iha Durlabham Manusham Janma Tad Apyadruvam Artadam Kaumara Acharit Pragyo Dharman Bhagavatan Iha Durlabham Manusham Janma Tad Apyadruvam Artadam Kaumara Acharit Pragyo Dharman Bhagavatan Iha Durlabham Manusham Janma Tad Apyadruvam Artadam.
Sri Prad Uvacha Omara Achared Pragyo Dharman Bhagavatan Iha Dolabam Manusham Janma Tad Apyadruvam Artadam.
Sri Praradavacha Komaram Acharet Pragyo Dharman Bhagavatan Iha Durlabham Manusham Janma Dadapya Dhruvam Artadam.
Thank you, Prabhu's word-for-word translation says, Shri Prarad Uvacha, Prahlad Maharaj said, Komaraha, in the tender age of childhood, Acharit, should practice. Pragyaha, one who is intelligent. Dharman, occupational duties. Bhagavatam, which are devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Iha, in this life. Durlabham, very rarely obtained. Manusham, human. Janma, birth. Tat, that. Api, even. Adruvam, impermanent, temporary. Artadam, full of meaning. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Prahlad Maharaj said, "One who is sufficiently intelligent should use the human form of body from the very beginning of life, in other words, from the tender age of childhood, to practice the activities of devotional service, giving up all other engagements. The human body is most rarely achieved, and although temporary like other bodies, it is meaningful because in human life one can perform devotional service. Even a slight amount of sincere devotional service can give one complete perfection." Purport. The whole purpose of Vedic civilization and of reading the Vedas is to attain the perfect stage of devotional service in the human form of life. According to the Vedic system, therefore, from the very beginning of life, the brahmacharya system is introduced so that from one's very childhood, from the age of 5 years, one can practice modifying one's human activities so as to engage perfectly in devotional service. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, Svalpamapyasya dharmasya trayate mahato bhayat. Even a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear. Modern civilization, not referring to the verdicts of Vedic literature, is so cruel to the members of human society that instead of teaching children to become brahmacharis, it teaches mothers to kill their children even in the womb, on the plea of curbing the increase of population. And if by chance a child is saved, he is educated only for sense gratification. Gradually, throughout the entire world, human society is losing interest in the perfection of life. Indeed, men are living like cats and dogs, spoiling the duration of their human lives by actually preparing to transmigrate again to the degraded species among the 8,400,000 forms of life. The Krishna consciousness movement is anxious to serve human society by teaching people to perform devotional service, which can save a human being from being degraded again to animal life. As already stated by Prahlad Maharaj, Bhagavata Dharma consists of Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atma, Nivedanam. In all the schools, colleges, and universities, and at home, all children and youths should be taught to hear about the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In other words, they should be taught to hear the instructions of Bhagavad Gita, to put them into practice in their lives, and thus to become strong in devotional service, free from fear of being degraded to animal life. Following Bhagavad Dharma has been made extremely easy in the age of Kali. The Shastra says, Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Nama eva kevalam, Kalo nastyeva, nastyeva, nastyeva gatir anyata. One need only chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Everyone engaged in the practice of chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra will be completely cleansed from the core of his heart and be saved from the cycle of birth and death. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Gyanatimmarandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swaparantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Scha Shri Rupam Sahagrajatam Sahakana Raghunathan Vidam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Paran Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitam Scha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasai Gaura Bhakta Vrindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Jai, Srila Prabhupada referenced this verse a few times throughout his lectures and throughout Srimad Bhagavatam commentary to emphasize a crucial but difficult point about human life, and that is that children can be trained to think in certain ways. And it's very controversial because that's where a lot of the politics of the secular world go down. The modern era has a fondness for secularism, at least in Western societies, thinking it to be a sort of enlightened and free society, but really it depends on training. So it's not really that enlightened and free. You have to train children to be secular. It doesn't come naturally, as I've said before, in observation of my own children and other children. It's very natural for children to inquire about what is the absolute truth. It's very simple. It's very natural. And René Descartes made this argument in part of his philosophizing, which he called the trademark argument, in which he claimed that God, having created all beings, sort of placed a trademark upon everyone, just like, someone who makes a product puts their name. And therefore, it's natural for every living being to inquire about the absolute truth and about God. The proof of this, of course, is that you cannot find a human who does not have some concept of God. It's impossible. There is none. And even the atheists are infatuated with the topic and are incessantly talking about the topic. And so this is Descartes' argument that it's very spontaneous, it's very natural for every living entity, especially every human, to inquire about the absolute truth, to inquire about God, atato brahma jigyasa. And so the modern infatuation with secularism, that social experiment, is a bit hypocritical in that children have to be trained to think otherwise. They have to be encouraged to not consider absolute truths. And the only way that's possible is to completely remove philosophy from education. And that has been effective in the last few decades. Maybe some of the more what's the nice way of saying, some of the more aged and refined members of our class this morning can remember that perhaps when you were in high school or even elementary school, there were some philosophy classes, a lot more humanities classes. Of course, in recent years, that's almost been completely removed. Now there's only STEM. Because, and there's historical reasons for that. I don't want to repeat myself so many times, but owing to the Cold War, generally any war, there's always a push for more technological development, more engineering. That's when most great leaps in technology happens during wartime because of the necessity People find ways, better ways to kill somebody else, or better ways to transmit information to the battlefield. And so, the education becomes molded during wartime for technology and engineering. And, what's the value of studying philosophy or epistemology? It's not going to help us win any wars. And so that stuff tends to go by the wayside. And yeah, hardly anyone these days is educated in philosophy, what to speak of theology, in their youth or in high school. And to be honest, it's very difficult even to find philosophy classes in tertiary education. They're becoming less common. Only a few law students might take a couple of philosophy classes. But it's certainly not a serious endeavor in public universities. In a few private Christian universities, there might be some education in different philosophical ideas. And so it's not surprising. It's not surprising that human society is bewildered about what is an ultimate purpose, especially in Western society. It's not surprising that in Western society they're losing their stance of supremacy in the world. The statistics show that the Eastern cultures, Middle Eastern and Asian cultures are definitely dominating in terms of productivity, in terms of birth rates, for no doubt. Western societies are all completely underneath replacement levels. I'm sure everybody's heard the news. And this is the result, actually, of that fascination with the modern social project called secularism, where there is no absolute truth. Everything is subjective. Everything is relative. Just do whatever you want. Whatever feels good must be the highest truth. And so it's not surprising that people become more self-absorbed and less community focused, less support for the community, less involved in community, less contribution to community, and then of course population decreases, and instead we get all sorts of other things, which Prabhupada's mentioning in this purport, like abortion. And so I'm going to take a wild risk as a relatively young man in 2026 and make some comments about abortion, which I know is not allowed. But I hope that everyone who's listening is likes me enough to allow me to have some thoughts on the subject, which are not different from Srila Prabhupada's thoughts. So if you don't like it, well, this is Prabhupada's comments. He's certainly never said anything in favor of abortion. Um, but it is mentioned here in this purport that instead of being educated as brahmacharis, instead of being educated in spiritual knowledge, quite the opposite is happening, that people are being educated to, eliminate a child in the womb if there's some inconvenience for good reasons or for bad reasons, whatever. Abortion is increasing a lot. I just looked up some statistics. And it says that in the first half of 2025, I guess they haven't counted the second half of 2025 yet because the number is so large. But the first half of 2025, there are an estimated 591,000 abortions provided in the United States, averaging 99,000 abortions per month. This represents an increase compared to previous years. Telehealth abortions accounting for 27% of the total. I did find statistics for 2004 where it said basically it was an 8.7% increase from 2023. Sorry, 2024 to 2023, 8.7% increase. We don't yet know the increase to 2025. You can only find statistics for the first 6 months. First 6 months in which 591,000 abortions. That's for 6 months. I mean, we could extrapolate that probably for the whole year would therefore be close to 1.2 million. which I can hardly believe this. I mean, I feel like I need to find some cross-referencing here. 1.2 million in a year? That's well beyond the population of a couple of the smaller states in America. That's just that's just incredible. Really incredible. Now, I don't want to judge, but we do judge. I mean, we have to judge. Even if you're not judging, it's a type of judgment. But I think that's pretty bad. I mean, I think that's really it's not just bad because that's a lot of potential humans that are not existing now, but also because it part of the issue is that it diminishes the overall appreciation of life. In my opinion, it's just comparable to the number of animals slaughtered. I mean, what is the number of cows killed in America? Who knows? Number of cows killed in America 2025. Let's just make a comparison. Um, yeah. Wow, thanks for not even telling me the number. I don't know, probably somebody else here knows the number of cows that's slaughtered in America annually. And we could say that in terms of like the development of an organism, it's comparable. Some people they argue that, the abortion of a fetus in a womb is not significant because, it's maybe a mere clump of cells. It's not fully developed. In some states, they've said that you cannot abort if there's a heartbeat. So there's a lot of gray area. But obviously, any life has some amount of consciousness, there's some amount of development, some amount of sensation through the knowledge acquiring senses, even as they grow. So it seems to me quite comparable to the enormous number of slaughter of developed animals like cows, swine, whatever, sheep. That these organisms, they also have a developed consciousness. They also have knowledge acquiring senses. They can feel something in their environment, more or less, depending on what types of bodies they have. And that sort of reconciliation and normalization of the immense number of slaughter of animals is comparable to the incredible number of abortions going on. And all of it just diminishes an appreciation and value of life, which cannot have good effects. Now, there might be some situations where someone feels justified in having an abortion, or where there's justification even to slaughter an animal and eat it. Like if you're starving and you're lost in the woods or something, there's a lot more justification. There's a lot less bad karma. But that's not the norm. That's not that's not the trend. The trend is that as more and more slaughter goes on, either of livestock animals or fetuses in a womb, each one chips away at an appreciation of life in general. 36 million cattle. God, that's just 36 million cow slaughtered each year in the US. Thank you, Tarika Prabhu. So each one is chipping away at an overall appreciation for life in general. And that's why we see an increase of these, well, slaughter of animals and abortion. I'm putting them all in the same category. And we see an increase in the amount of violent crime that is perpetuated. We see an increase in the suicide rate, of course, that's always going up. And I think that if that trend continues, could be the society that normalizes this could be hellish in ways that we can't even imagine yet. If a living organism is just considered a sort of commodity, a disposable commodity, like a single-use plastic fork. It's just, it's there for some time, and if it's disposed, so what? Never mind the fact that a plastic fork takes at least 500 years to decompose. We don't exactly know, of course, because they haven't been around for hundreds of years. But in the same way, one recklessly disposes of some plastic fork. So similarly, a human society that has diminished the value of life will recklessly dispose of different forms of life. And yeah, I think any dystopian, horrible dystopian future that you can imagine is possible as that becomes normalized. And so it's not good. Let's be honest, it's not good. It's not good, and it's all the result of a particular training. But before I get to that, there's an interesting phenomenon called, I've mentioned this, I think, to Agari Krishna Prabhu, where someone wrote this article called "The Only Moral Abortion is My Abortion," which kind of became this cult trend. It gained a lot of popularity, in which it was researching statistics about what sort of people go and get abortions, and a surprisingly large number of women who procure abortions are anti-abortion. A surprisingly large number. The statistics are very old. I don't know if there are some modern ones if it's been updated, but there's some from 1981, some from 1995. Anyway, it's showing large numbers, usually around a quarter, about 25%, it seems to be the average, 25 to 30% of abortions are procured by women who are anti-abortion. So what's going on there? Obviously, as is the case with humans, we have a tendency to justify a lot of things and consider ourselves to be an exception to a rule. It's very easy for me as a young man to say, oh, an abortion is bad and it shouldn't be done, and I'm against it and I'm opposed and pro-life and this and that. But the statistics show that if, you know, Hare Krishna, if somehow my daughter or uh, became impregnated as a teenager or something, the statistics show that suddenly those people will say, well, in our case, in our case, somehow, it's okay because whatever, this reason or that reason or whatever reason. And so, despite some people's proclamation of being pro-life, we see that actually approximately 25 to 30% of them contribute to that very thing that they're opposed to. So this is a really interesting phenomenon, showing how flexible our morals can be when we're really put to the test. And I just bring that up so that we have a little sympathy in dealing with the issue. Obviously, Prabhupada is opposed, and I think in general, we are, I would imagine most people in our community are opposed to the idea. And yet, even for something like this, there should be some sympathy because we, Hare Krishna, thank God that many of us have never been in that situation where we have to make that sort of choice and decide what to do. But still, I'm not trying to justify the practice. It is obviously bad. And as I was saying, diminishes the value of life, which has horrible ramifications for everything in society. And it's really just the result of a particular type of education. There's a particular type of education which is common now, which teaches children that you are chemical scum. What is it that Stephen Hawking famously said? Chemical scum on an insignificant planet in some unknown corner of a what is it? A ruthless void universe or whatever. And some of these people, they really lean into that depravity, that diminishment of the value of life as if it's like funny, like that edgy atheistic view. Yeah, you're just a chemical scum. You're just chemical determinism, whatever it is that you've been eating for breakfast, is determining why you're thinking in some particular way or some other way. And there's no value, no intrinsic value to your life, except that by chance some chemicals mixed together and created this body of yours, and you're only hallucinating a consciousness. This is where the Darwinists have really taken it to the max because they can't reconcile consciousness coming out of chemistry. And so some, like Daniel Dennett, they argue that actually your consciousness is just a sort of hallucination, like a survival mechanism. Really, you don't have any free will. Everything that you do is just, the result of physical forces. You're only just imagining that you kind of have thoughts about it. Evolution has evolved this mechanism to just imagine that you exist to help you survive or whatever. This constant diminishment of life is it requires a certain training, and children are trained to think in that way, which is really creepy, actually. And even I remember being in middle school, probably sixth or seventh or eighth grade, and being taught that Lucy is your great, 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 great grandmother, whatever. I don't know how many of you remember the fossil Lucy. Many people considered the missing link. Um, if you actually look at the fossil, there's not a whole lot there. But anyway, people see what they want to see. All fossil interpretation is very subjective and circular reasoning. But if there's no training in philosophy, of course, people don't consider that. They just consider, well, this is some absolute truth. And I remember being taught that Lucy is my great, 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 great grandmother. And we had to make little Lucy dolls out of paper mache and recite some poem about Lucy. And it was a strange indoctrination for children to be taught that you are just a chemical scum on an insignificant planet, as Stephen Hawking would say. That requires a certain training. You have to train children to think in that way. It does not come naturally, as I can see in educating my own children and in the neighborhood children. That's not a natural thing to think that your life is just a chemical reaction. No, that's a sort of indoctrination that needs to be pressed upon children again and again and again. And even still, many of them reject it for obvious reasons, because that's not conducive to our self-evident experience. No human has a self-evident experience that I'm chemically determined. No, that's a metaphysical indoctrination, a sort of interpretation of select data. And it starts with a child. And that's why this verse and this purport is very important. That's why Srila Prabhupada has emphasized it many times. As much as the secular society would like that everyone just makes a choice, everyone is just free to do whatever they want. No, actually, children have to be indoctrinated to think in that way. It does not come naturally. It does not come naturally, the idea that you just do anything that you want, the idea that your whole life is just chemicals, does not come naturally, that there is no absolute truth. That doesn't come naturally to children. They need to be taught to think of themselves as just a particular organ that's meant for just reproducing and surviving, and that evolution has dictated that you survive better in society, and so therefore just contribute some minimal amount to that society. They need to be taught that. They need to be trained in that way. It does not come natural. What comes natural is inquiry into the absolute truth. Anyone who has kids, of course, knows as soon as your kids can think and talk, they're always asking, what causes this and what causes that and what causes everything? It's very natural for them. And so what Prahlad is saying here, and Prabhupada's purport, is very relevant. The battleground is the school, especially in America. The battleground is the public school, because everyone recognizes that adults don't change very easily. The older we get, the more fixed in certain ways, are we? And so if you want to get new members into a particular ideology, you have to start when they're young. You have to start with children. And therefore, Prabhupada, what he's saying here is absolutely relevant. So yes, children should be trained in Krishna consciousness. They're going to be trained in something. Why not train them in Krishna consciousness? Why not encourage them to ask about the nature of God? Why not encourage them to really think about it, to approach those questions with confidence that there is an answer? In public school, a child asks that question, and they'll be taught that there is not an answer, that it's just an hallucination to think that there's some absolute truth. And nothing can be known. And so just worry about your productivity. As Prabhupada says here, they're being trained in sense gratification. Really, they're educated in sense gratification just so much as it is productive for whoever is the master of the day. So rather, we should encourage children that when they inquire about an absolute truth, we should encourage them that there is an answer and that they should continue to inquire. Atato Brahma Jigyasa. I mean, how much nicer is that? One should inquire about the absolute truth. But there are some who think that that is appalling to teach that to children, that they should inquire about the absolute truth, that that should be completely removed from education. Education is only for productivity and a little sense gratification. Artha and Kama. That's it. In some countries, that is the explicit motto of the Department of Education. Like in New Zealand, our spiritual master, His Holiness Devamrita Swami, met with one of the former prime ministers. I can't remember his name now. And they were talking about the explicit slogan of the Department of Education for the country of New Zealand was that education is for producing productive members of a capitalist society or something. It was very explicit. Like, that's the point. Get in there and make stuff so that someone can have more money. Now, it's very natural for children to inquire into the absolute truth. It's very natural for children to be philosophical, inquisitive, atato brahma jigyasa. Our secular experiment is unnatural in that it discourages that sort of inquiry, really discourages, and rather indoctrinates people to have a very low estimation of the value of life. Very low. And I think that we should try to encourage people to do better. Those of us who have kids or going to have kids, we should really think about your right to influence them. And even though we are an island of devotion in an ocean of secular obligation, you still have the right to influence your children in a particular way, to encourage them to inquire in a particular way, as Prahlad Maharaj is encouraging in this verse here. They should be taught the instructions of Bhagavad Gita to put them into practice in their lives and thus become strong in devotional service, free from fear of being degraded to animal life. That's what Prabhupada's saying in this purport. It's so explicit, so clear. And then he says it's so easy. You just chant Hare Krishna. It's extremely easy, Prabhupada says, extremely easy in this age of Kali to chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. It's also very easy for children to chant Hare Krishna. Now when I go and I make an offering to our deities, an offering some boga, ringing the bell, little Radha immediately runs up and she'll chant Prabhupada's pranam mantra. She'll chant Hare Krishna. I never taught her. She just hears it all the time, so she'll do it. Madhava also sometimes he'll run up and start chanting Hare Krishna with us. It's just very easy for them. They become cleansed from the core of their heart. They become naturally inquisitive into inquiring about the absolute truth, and naturally devoted. It's very simple. That comes very natural for children. The diminishment of the value of life is not natural. It is a cultish indoctrination. It should be protested, in my opinion. So, Prahlad Maharaj was saying this millennia ago. It was a long time ago. And yet it is still absolutely relevant. It is still a hot topic. Komaram acharet pragyo, dharman bhagavataniha. Even in the tender age of childhood, one should begin to practice devotional service. One should be trained in that way. If children are not trained in that way, they will be trained to in a diminished value of life. They won't take their own life with a lot of value, hence the incredible number of suicides. They won't value other lives, hence the sort of comfort we have with the incredible amount of slavery that's happening around the world and war. And we can see the results of that everywhere. So, all glories to Prahlad Maharaj for saying this even to his young schoolmates. All glories to Srila Prabhupada for taking a strong stance and a controversial stance. And all glories to those devotees who really try to encourage their children in Krishna consciousness. We see that most children are very attracted to Krishna consciousness. They naturally continue throughout their life in one way or another. They have a very high retention rate because it is, as Prabhupada said, extremely easy, very natural. Hare Krishna. I had some other points, but I guess I'll just finish there and ask if there's some comments. I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. I know the topic of abortion is controversial even within devotee communities, and I certainly don't want to make anybody uncomfortable by bringing it up, but it is a part of life, and we do have to take a stance on it. And I think Prabhupada's stance is pretty clear. Hare Krishna. Ask if there's any comments or any additions or subtractions. And if not, I'll just say something about Jayadev Goswami, whose appearance day is today. Hare Krishna Leela Kishori Mataji. So nice to see your digital hand. Hare
Hi,
Krishna.
Krishna. Good morning. Thank you so much for your class. Always informative, always instructive. And I was just thinking about the numbers that you gave around abortion and how they seem almost astounding, like it couldn't possibly be. But if you ask anyone who's ever worked in pediatrics in any capacity, and if you think about it, younger people, people your age and younger, when I grew up, I went to school with at least 2 children that had Down syndrome, with some children that had spina bifida. In your generation, they have almost disappeared. And that's because of the science, because of things like amniocentesis. So people began to see ahead of time that perhaps this child wasn't exactly perfectly the way that they wanted this child to be. And the choice has been to abort these children. And if you really think about it, how many children have you seen in your age or your children's age that have Down syndrome or that have spina bifida or some of these other things that were much more common? And, you know, the question that, yes, we have to honor life because life, humans are humans. I don't decide how a child comes into the world. You don't decide. But when people take it into their own hands, this is what happens, you know? So it isn't, to me, having worked as a pediatric physical therapist, it's not surprising at all the numbers because I know whole, you know, classes of people that have just disappeared, weren't given the opportunity to come here. And in all religions, when you talk about, you know, that the fundamental idea of God exists everywhere. All holy books, there is at least one passage that says that in the Christian Bible, it says, I knew you before you were placed in your mother's womb. So the reality that you are a spirit soul before you even are placed in the womb is there, you know. So I think it's very important to talk about these things. And yes, I did have ethics class when I went to school. I mean, you know, it was as best as
Not
they could do,
anymore.
but it was ethics. It taught empathy. It taught, you know, values, right and wrong, mores, norms. Right, not anymore. So even that has been taken away. And yes, society will just degrade and become more and more savage. So I do agree with you. There are communities in the world, you know, Hasidic Jews are a prime example that just educate their children completely, separate themselves in the midst of major cities, separate themselves, The Amish might be another community, that there are still communities that are trying to, teach their religion and philosophy to their children. But, and yes, certainly, why would we not in this conflict? Why would we not? Why would that not happen? Why would there not be gurukuls? Why is this not a bigger thing? So thank you so much. Again, enlightening, enlivening, and please keep talking about this. It's so important. It really, really is. Hare Krishna.
Thanks for the encouragement, Mother. You just reminded me before Taraka Prabhu had something that several years ago, when we didn't have the center and we were preaching at Penn State, there was one girl who was coming along, Jackie. Oops, probably shouldn't have said her name. Anyway, she became pregnant, and for whatever reason, she actually reached out to Nandini and I. I mean, she wasn't like really serious about bhakti, and I haven't even seen her since, but she was coming along for some time, and I guess she looked up to us a little bit, and she asked us, do you think I should abort this child? And we said, no. It was like the first time I had to really deal with a person who was going through this, and I said, no, I think that you should have faith that miracles can happen if you have a child, that it'll make your life so much better. And then she kept the child. I don't know. It probably wasn't us, the only person who influenced her, but she kept her child. And so I mean, it's really happening. It's like when you have to talk to someone who's going through that. I guess especially it was remarkable for me as a man because I can only imagine what it's like. But to get to talk to someone who's really having to go through that and to encourage them to keep the child was really amazing. I think she's doing well. Hare Krishna. Tarika Prabhu, would you like to add something about Krishna consciousness and or
Hare
abortion?
Krishna. Krishna consciousness. My God, I have no qualification to contribute anything to the cause of Krishna consciousness. I just like to talk. So, my first thought is that, and I'm curious to know what you think about this, but I'm thinking that there actually are no true atheists. As far as I can see, even the most hardcore atheist has a conception that there is a cause of all causes, which is a definition for the absolute truth, for God. It's one definition. It's a simple understanding. It's an impersonal conception of God, but that's one understanding of God, the cause of all causes. It's a definition that Srila Prabhupada uses frequently. So even the most hardcore atheistic scientist has this conception that there is a cause of all causes, which they estimate sometimes to be the Big Bang or whatever, but they have that idea that for everything that exists, there was something that caused it, and they try to trace back as far as they can, trying to find the original cause, the cause of all causes. So even the scientists are searching for God, but they don't realize it. That's my opinion. You might agree or not. What else did I have? Speaking of cause and effect, abortion really should not be controversial if we speak of it in terms of cause and effect, because there are, like everything else, there are unavoidable reactions. Every action has some reaction, and we can speak of abortion in that way, that you may think, or one may think or do as one chooses, but you can't evade the unavoidable reactions. There's always going to be some sort of reaction. And if assuming in general people are pleasure seeking and they want to avoid any sort of unpleasant situation, you may want to consider what are the reactions for abortion, because certainly are reactions, and that they are serious. They are very grave reactions. So we don't even have to take a position on the morality of abortion, but we have a duty to educate people. They should understand the law of cause and effect. They should understand what are the consequences, and that's inescapable. I also had, like yourself, I had the experience of having occasion to offer some counsel to a young woman who became pregnant. In my case, however, this was a co-worker who we talked a lot, and she really wasn't necessarily interested in my opinion about what course of action she should take, but I couldn't help myself. And my position, as I presented it to her, was that because her position was that it's my body and I should be free to do what I like. And I countered her statement by saying, well, from the perspective of your child, it's her body. So your position is that no one should have the right to tell you what you should do with your body. What gives you the right to make decisions about your child's body? And somehow or other, that actually made sense to this young woman, and she decided not to abort. She was unmarried, and for a host of reasons, she didn't want to have a child at that time, and it was a great inconvenience. But she wound up having the child, fell absolutely in love with her child, and was extremely happy that she had chosen to keep that child, and had absolutely no question in her mind that it was the right decision. Anyway, that's all I've got.
Yeah, that's
Mark?
generally the case. When you have children, you really love them. So it's good to hear those stories and to remind people. And of course, it's easy for us to say, especially as men, because I mean, men have to take care of kids too. But it's good to always remember these stories and share them so that, you know, if a young woman finds herself in that position, she can be encouraged that actually having a child is just the most amazing thing, as pretty much every parent will say. It's nothing more amazing than that. So thank you for sharing that as well. It's encouraging. Dinapalika Devidasi, would you like to say something about Krishna consciousness and or abortion and or cow slaughter? We're kind of all over the place today.
Yeah, thank you for your class. I was just thinking of one example whenever I was in my first semester at Temple. I think because we were in the honors college, we had to take like an ethics course or something like that. But I was kind of, I guess, classroom friends with this one kid who was going to, I was in the liberal arts college, but he was in the Fox School of Business there. And so we were discussing ethics and, you know, all kinds of things, Iliad and Odyssey, like great classics. And we're discussing morality. And then he just started like getting really emotional and breaking down crying. And he's like, you don't understand, like the School of Business, there's no morality. All they're teaching us there is just to step on everyone's head and, you know, just basically use others, just exploit others so that we can get ahead in our jobs and in business. So just to your point, I mean, that's like a, you know, a real world example as well. To your point about basically students are getting more and more trained just to exploit rather than any amount of morality.
Yes, it's an indoctrination. It's a training. And I saw an interesting article yesterday saying that, hey, free democratic societies aren't as productive as China. So, totalitarianism is coming. That no, the person who wrote the article coined a different phrase. What about authoritarian capitalism? Like they're saying, they're kind of glorifying. Look over in China. They're so much more productive. They're saying like the number of patents that's been filed in China, of course, the GDP and their exports just totally eclipses Europe and the Western world. They're saying authoritarian capitalism is far more productive. Maybe this is what we should be doing as well. So, yeah, it's just absolutely no morality. Of course, as much as I love Chinese people, there's not a lot of morality there. Whole ethnic groups are just wiped out whenever it's inconvenient. Productivity is the name of the game, and if it kills people, so what? So, that sort of thing, it's coming to America. It's on its way over. It's becoming a popular idea. We should be a lot more authoritarian in organizing our markets. We'll be so much more productive. It's a little frightening to think about. Hare Krishna. We're a bit over time, so I suppose we should finish here. It is 8:04, unless there's anyone else burning to say something. We covered a lot of controversial topics today. But if not, I'll remind everyone that it's also Jayadev Goswami's appearance day, which is very sweet. Jayadev Goswami is such a wonderful devotee who wrote many prayers that we recite, especially the prayer that we recite to Lord Nrsingadev, Tavakara Kamalavare Nakam Adbhuta Shringham. It's part of his Dasavatara Stotra. It's a prayer for all of the different avatars. And of course, he wrote Gita Govinda, which is filled with so many intimate pastimes of Radha and Krishna. And he had wonderful exchanges with Krishna. Krishna helped him to write in many ways. And so we're grateful to Jayadev Goswami, who Lord Chaitanya himself really appreciated his writings and his devotional prayers and his bhajans. And so let's remember when we recite the Nrsimha Pranams that it was composed by Jayadev Goswami, but he's also composed very sweet, very esoteric Radha Krishna pastimes with the help of Mother Saraswati. So all glories to Jayadev Goswami's appearance day. Hare Krishna. Thank you, dear devotees, for tuning in. May you all attain pure devotional service today. Om Tat Sat. Thanks a lot.